Hi, welcome. I am Dr. Jacqueline Rinaldi, and today we're going to talk about showing up as your best self in life and in business. So, what does it mean to show up as your best self? Our best self is when we walk away from a situation feeling as though we like who we are. It doesn't mean we did everything perfect. It means we showed up with purpose and we followed through with that purpose. We feel congruent with our intention. It means we showed up the way that we intended to show up. And curiously, when we show up as our best selves, in a sense, that gives other people the permission to do the same in their lives. So today we're going to look at 4 easy steps that can help us show up as our best self. So first one is get out of emergency mode. Number 2, we're going to look at self-talk. This is super important. Number 3, self-awareness. And number 4, finding meaning. Okay, so the first one, get out of emergency mode. So setting healthy boundaries is an essential piece for living with, peace and well-being in our lives. Healthy boundaries are the framework that helps us keep a sense of safety in line with our life. Healthy boundaries give us a sense of trust in who we are. We trust ourselves when we're capable of setting healthy boundaries. That self-trust is an essential piece to be able to show up as our best self. As we become better at setting healthy boundaries and keeping those boundaries, we reduce anxiety, depression, and other states of disharmony. So what do healthy boundaries look like? That's a question I hear all the time. Healthy boundaries are taking care of your needs first. You know that story the flight attendants always tell us when we get on an airplane, right? And that says, in the event of an emergency, put on your oxygen mask first, and then help a child or those around you who may need your assistance. So if you don't put on your oxygen mask first, you could become a liability to the emergency rather than being an able-bodied passenger who can help the crew in evacuation if that were to come to be what needed to happen. So boundaries work the same way. You need to put on your oxygen mask first in order to meet the world as a whole person. We have to fill up our tank first. The only way to show up as the best version of who we are is by showing up as our whole self. So in order to set proper boundaries, we need to know where our limits are. When is too much too much? When you're aware of your limits, when you're aware of where those limits are, it's easier to declare and to say no, to enforce them, right? To gain more clarity on where you need to set healthier limits, it's important to pay attention to your body. Notice when you start to feel anxious. Do you feel something in your tummy? Do you feel knots? Do you feel kind of heat or pressure somewhere in your body? You might feel hurried. You might feel impatient. You might notice a reaction with your kids or with a coworker. You might feel stressed or overwhelmed. All of those feelings are cues that we have too much going on. So is there something you can eliminate? Can you take things off your plate for a little while and come back to them after you knock a few things off your list? How do we implement healthy boundaries? So the biggest thing to remember is stop saying yes when you need to say no. No is a perfectly okay answer. Always, no matter what, no is an okay answer. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your time or energy. If the answer is no, there are many kind and assertive ways to communicate that no. If you're spreading yourself too thin and you don't have time, stop saying yes to commitments until things are a little bit more under control, until you have space. When we're going from go, 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 it's really tough to show up as our best self because we're just stressed about we're getting to the next thing. We're just getting to the next thing. So if you're spreading yourself too thin and you want some ideas on how to communicate that no, that assertiveness, you might say something like, hey, you know what, this week doesn't work for me, but I'll give you a call over the next few weeks when things slow down. Or maybe even lunch doesn't work for me, but I'm up for meeting for coffee in the morning, because coffee can be a 15-minute thing instead of an hour thing. So there's creative ways where you can still include others, but yet set boundaries. And sometimes the answer is just a flat out no. My plate is full. You know what? I'll let you know when things change. I really appreciate you reaching out. Thanks so much. That's it. Period. End of story. We don't have to discuss why the answer is no. The answer is simply no. Again, we need to know our limits so that we're prepared to say no when we need to say no. If we don't know where our limits are, where they start or stop, oftentimes we say yes out of obligation, or yes might even become that default setting for us. We might just automatically say yes. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity. But yes without discernment can potentially create a life that lives forever on this hamster wheel of chaos, right? Never understanding why we can't get out of emergency mode. So if we're living in emergency mode, there's always a choice. And that choice, part of that choice is stop saying yes when we need to say no. We don't want life to pass from one chaotic moment to the next. We want to have pauses. And in those pauses, that's where we nurture our own well-being. And we step up and we can come present our whole self in those moments. So give yourself permission to take care of yourself. This is important. Make time for yourself, as important as the time that you allocate for work or for friends or for family. Now, of course, you're not going to spend as much time on your own well-being as you are at work, but make it like an appointment. I'm intending to do a meditation today, and I'm going to schedule that time. I'm going to put it in my calendar if that helps me, so that I see it when I look at my day. I'm like, oh, look at that. At 4 p.m. today, I'm doing that hour-long meditation. Good for me. So I have that scheduled in there. Or maybe it's a yoga class, or maybe it's another kind of a workout class. Maybe it's a bike ride. Maybe it's a walk. Whatever it might be, schedule that time. It might be journaling. It might be whatever. In a sense, this is how you show up as your own best friend. This is how the idea behind self-care is that you walk away feeling cherished by you. So again, you might choose going for a hike. You might choose journaling, prayer, meditation, walking outside. You might choose taking photography or doing some kind of creative art. All of those things are wonderful things to do as a self-care project. You need to know the answer to these questions in order to show up as our best self. We need to know where our boundaries lie, where we have to say no, where we start taking care of ourselves in order to show up as our own best self. Remember, if you don't fill up your tank, you can't show up as your best self because you're coming to the party, in a sense, already depleted. So for some of us, getting into the trap of pleasing others can be difficult to change. Often it seems easier to avoid or pacify or even act in some passive-aggressive ways other than speaking clearly and directly to communicate our truth or our needs. Oftentimes, I notice with clients that I work with in teams, that team might only be, in place for, say, 6 weeks or something like that. We're on this special project and we're working together for 6 weeks. And so it's easier just to please the team in that 6 weeks. But one of the things that we do when we don't engage ourselves, when we don't have clear and direct communication, we don't give that team the opportunity to really be creative and innovative. We're not showing up as our best self when we're not having clear and direct communication because we're stifling in some ways, we're pushing down in some ways. It doesn't mean we come out there and start, hollering at people and telling them why they're awful or terrible. But it does mean we speak our truth and we hold people accountable when we need to hold people accountable. So if it does feel easier to avoid or pacify, some of the things to consider might be, maybe it feels as if your needs aren't as important as theirs. Maybe it feels like you're the team leader, so you have to make everybody else important, which is true to a degree, right? As a team leader, we do want to value our team members and make them feel entrusted and valued and safe. But we also need to express our own. So as long as we're doing that not at our own expense, not in a way where we're pushing down what we need to communicate, then it's great, then it's fine, then it's actually quite effective. Sometimes clients will express that they feel when they're expressing their needs, they feel that they're harsh. Or maybe in some ways you feel you're not supposed to have needs. You're the person who takes care of everyone else. You're not the person who receives care or concern. The problem is, some of the time we all need care and concern. So we want to look at where our behavior is accommodating when it's at our expense. Pleasing usually happens when we do not feel that our needs or thoughts or opinions are as valuable as someone else's. We may have learned to be uncomfortable with confrontation. So accommodating others keeps the peace. It's easier to do. It keeps us safe from feeling that discomfort. We may have learned to play it safe, to not be a bother by causing waves, or if we express our needs, that's causing waves. I'm being a bother. That's high maintenance. Whatever it is. Yet, in order to have open and honest communication, we need to learn to communicate our needs. We need to be worthy of having needs and expressing them. If we expect others to mind read, we are definitely setting up that team for failure. No one is a mind reader. And by expecting someone just to know what the team needs or what your needs are as the team leader or as a team member, it's really just a way to avoid taking responsibility for creating the outcome that the team is fighting for or looking for. One of the ways to overcome pleasing is to start small and start declaring your needs. Say, try 3 to 4 times a week. When you go to lunch with a coworker, this is always an easy one. When you go to lunch with a coworker or a friend, and if you've been in the habit of always saying, "Oh, I don't care where we eat, you pick," stop yourself and say something like, I've been wanting to try that new Italian place. How does that sound to you? Just declare it. If that feels too much, then say, you know what? I was thinking that salad place sounds really good, but I'm open. Where would you like to eat? Something like that. Either way, you've declared your needs and your truth, and that is an act of self-esteem. That's an act of building this resilience towards trusting yourself. And it always feels uncomfortable at first, but like anything we do, we grow that muscle to think different. So again, the more awareness we have of why we are accommodating others, the easier it is to dismantle that behavior. Is there something that we're afraid of? Are we afraid to be a bother? Are we uncomfortable in some way? What is the commonality between the situation where you predominantly find yourself accommodating others? Is there a commonality? Is it a certain situation? Is it only when this person is in the group or when this person is the team leader? Do you find yourself accommodating more? And then ask yourself, is the story that I'm telling myself about this situation true? Is it 100% true? Is the story that I believe to be true really the thing that's going on? Am I missing something? Can I broaden my perspective to some degree? And usually we can. Often I hear clients tell me that healthy boundaries seem harsh or mean. And the more entrenched we are in accommodating others or accommodating behaviors, the more assertive behaviors seem harsh. So the idea is to realign that sense so that assertive behaviors begin to feel like the norm, the standard operating procedure. If you are assertive and I am assertive, and you take care of you and I take care of me, then neither one of us worries about the other, right? We both show up to our meeting. You put on your oxygen mask first with the metaphor. I put on mine. And we present ourselves. We can show up as our best self because I'm not worried about you and you're not worried about me. There's no muddy water. There's nothing that, oh, what about this? What about that? Should I be worried about that? Is she going to do this? Is she going to do that? We have direct and clear communication. It makes, actually over time, it makes things more peaceful and at ease. In order to stay out of emergency mode, we set healthy boundaries to protect our energy and our time. Our energy is just as important as our time. If we walk into a meeting and somebody has that, energy vampire feel where we feel like that we just got attacked by a parasite and they're sucking the blood right out of us, that's important to note. That's important to note that this person's energy affects you that way. So we want to limit our meeting time with them. We want to say, okay, cool, I'm going to set it up so we can communicate what we need to communicate in a very confined amount of time. So I'm going to give them 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And then, you might set an alarm that goes off and says, okay, We have 5 more minutes. I just wanted to set that alarm so we stay on track. We have 5 more minutes. Is there anything else that we need to discuss in order to move to the next step? And then you end the meeting and you move on. So it's also important to get enough sleep when we're protecting our energy and our time. We need to take care of our physical well-being and our spiritual well-being, whatever that might look like for you. It looks different for all of us. And we also need to take time to nurture meaningful connections in our life. And we're going to talk about that more in just a minute. So the next hugely important thing is to become aware of your self-talk. We have this news ticker bar in our mind that is usually selected on non-stop commentary mode and has some kind of opinion or comment on absolutely everything we feel, see, hear, notice, or experience, right? So how aware are you of the messages you relay to yourself on a continuous basis? How aware are you? What does your self-talk look like? What does it feel like? Listen to the tone and pay attention to the message that's being said in your mind. How do you speak to yourself when you break a glass in the kitchen? What do you say? What do you say to yourself when you lose your temper at work or you speak harshly to a team member? You know, when you go home at night, what is it that you replay in your mind after you had that harsh conversation with a team member? What do you say to yourself if you miss a deadline or if you fail in some way on a project at work? When we get aware of that inner critic in our mind, we notice that oftentimes this critic can be brutal and unforgiving. I've had clients that name their inner critic in order to personify it. This can be a powerful thing because when we personify it, it's easier to change. We see it as something, an entity that we can change. I've had clients describe the detail of their inner critic, like the tone of voice. I've had women clients who see that inner critic as a male voice. And I've had some people see it as just their own inner voice. So whatever it is for you, there's no right or wrong. It's simply a matter of self-understanding. It's simply a matter of learning what it looks like for you. Is your inner critic harsh and mean or cutting? Does your critic call you names? Something like I hear a lot in my practice. You're so stupid or dumb, or you're such a loser. I can't believe you did that. You're never going to amount to anything. These are common ones that I hear all the time. And oftentimes they're much worse. So the question becomes, when you start to notice this inner critic and notice where this, the tone and the quality that is being communicated or the message that's being communicated, ask yourself, would you speak to your best friend with this tone that your inner critic is using for you? Would you speak to your best friend in that way? If you have children, if someone spoke to your child with the same tone and delivered the same message as you hear in your head every day, would you call that abuse? Would you protect your child from that? So imagine how this constant negativity affects how you show up in the world. If your inner critic is telling you you don't have what it takes, how will you walk into the meeting as your best self? How will you walk into the meeting believing that you do? You might power through it, right? But really to show up as our best self would be to turn that voice off. So we really walk into that meeting knowing that we have what it takes, believing that we have what it takes. That's really how we show up as our best self. If your inner critic is talking to you on your way to work, like say you're driving in your car, and that inner critic is just going at it in your ear, saying you're a fraud and you're in way over your head, how are you ever going to be able to walk into that meeting at work and truly suggest something creative and innovative? You're not going to be able to, right? Because that inner critic is telling you you're a fraud and you're incapable. So that's saying I'm not safe enough to really be creative. I'm not safe enough to really be innovative, because in order to be innovative, I have to go out on a limb. I have to think of a way that nobody's done this before. And that's a little bit scary. That's a little bit vulnerable. So if my inner critic is telling me that I'm in way over my head, that I'm a fraud, I'm never going to really be able to tap into my own creativity and innovative ideas to really change the system or, whatever, the program that you're trying to work on. This inner critic can chip away at our self-esteem as we hear these words countless times a day. So imagine what happens over the course of years, 10 years or 20 years, whatever amount of time. We really can cause harm to ourselves. And it's really difficult to show up as our best self when we don't stop that dialogue. So how do we stop this inner critic? What do we do? The first step is awareness. We gotta be aware of what's happening when it's happening in order to change it. We need to see the reality of the situation. We need to call it what it is, which is partly why a lot of my clients have named that inner critic. If you want to name your critic, name her. If you don't, that's okay too. And then every time you hear her chime in, for the next month or so, say something like, "Not today, Cupcake. You're done. It's not your time. There's the door. Start heading out. You no longer serve me." Something like that. You want to make it in your words and make it so it makes sense to you. But stop her dead in her tracks as soon as you realize the dialogue that's going on in your mind. As soon as you realize it's toxic to any degree, degrading or causing you to feel less than great about yourself, stop it. Most people are often surprised at how much chatter happens in their mind without their awareness. So remember, you're in charge, not your critic. So take charge of your mind and your thoughts. Become your own best friend. And think of it that way. When you want to stop your inner critic, would you speak to your best friend in that way? And if the answer is no, stop that critic dead in its tracks. Be kind to yourself. When we feel the harsh words and reframe them to a gentle, realistic appraisal, we can really motivate ourselves. We get out of that shame factor and we get into productive, creative movement. So when we look at this, we're not trying to discount any sense of taking responsibility for a failure or not doing well enough. Not at all. We're reappraising it accurately. If we could have done something better or different, we talk about that. We go, yeah, you know what? I could have spent more time on that report. I see where I didn't quite hold up my end of the bargain. So next time I'm going to do this, this, and this. And that is going to ensure that I have, a report that I'm proud of. Those are the kind of things we do. That's an accurate appraisal. It would be an inaccurate appraisal to say, oh my gosh, I always fail. I can't believe I did that. It was so awful. It was the worst thing ever. That's an inaccurate appraisal. So we reframe things to have a more accurate appraisal with a kinder undertone. So you're such a failure becomes, this project didn't turn out as well as I would like. So next time I can do this, this, and this to ensure a better result. Do you see the difference? The latter fosters self-esteem and growth. It's a growth mindset perspective, which is really important. A growth mindset frames failures or loss as a needed part of success. Whereas if we have to be perfect, or if we have to always have the answer, we have just taken out the key aspect of creating success, which is failure. We learn from failure. We grow from failure. So if we have to be perfect, we're not allowed to fail. Where does that leave us? That leaves us in a very rigid and confined state that, again, takes away our creativity and innovation, which is the thing we're seeking to duplicate as much as possible. We change our corporations and our companies and our businesses through innovative and creative thinking, right? That's the thing that allows us to do it different enough to make a difference in the world, to make a difference in our employees' lives, to make a difference in our own lives. So again, we want to make sure that we're at the drawing table, and that allows us to try and try again. Life is a drawing table. No one is an overnight success. It takes hours and hours of beating on our craft to turn into pros. No one is born a pro. Pros are created. Yes, of course, some people are born with some natural talent more than other people, but that doesn't make them a success. Their success comes from grit, perseverance, and hard work. Angela Duckworth wrote a great book titled Grit. And in her book, she explains how genius is something that is developed over hours and hours of practice. It's not some stroke of luck that one is born with. So harnessing our self-talk is the key to owning the mental game. It's the hardest thing to master. If we want to use the sports metaphor, a professional tennis player doesn't struggle the most with mastering the ball or mastering the court or even mastering their opponent. It's their mind that is the biggest challenge to success. If you believe you can, you will. If you believe you can't, you won't. You'll be right either way. You see, the choice is in our mind. Do we harness our self-talk and champion our evolution as we become the best version of who we are? Or do we stay small, listening to that lunacy of that inner critic in our mind? Spend time learning who you are. I don't mean listing your accomplishments or what you did or how successful you are. I mean, learn who you are. I'm kind. I'm smart. I'm funny. I procrastinate sometimes. I'm compassionate. I am moved deeply by others who dive into their psyche and change the outcomes of their lives. That's a little piece about who I am. So who are you? So knowing who you are is the cornerstone of nurturing a strong sense of self. And that strong sense of self is really the key to changing our life, to being able to show up as our best self. That strong sense of self is that notion that you trust yourself, that you trust who you become, you trust your decisions, you trust the outcome because you believe yourself to be capable. Okay, that was number 2. Now number 3, self-awareness. We talked about being aware of our self-talk. So now let's talk about being aware of our emotional states, self-awareness. When I teach psychology to college students, I teach that our psyche and our body are two sides of the same coin. Our body uses sensations to speak to us. This is one language, right? And then our mind uses thoughts and feelings to speak to us. That's another language. So when we can speak both languages, or rather when we're able to hear both languages, we have greater insight into what our emotional well-being is holding for us. If we can discern what our body is communicating through the senses, maybe we feel tightness in our tummy or pain, or maybe there's a hot flash, something in the back of your neck that's hot or tingly. We're going to have a greater understanding of what our psyche is communicating about our emotional state. It's almost like our body gives us a heads up. So what is self-awareness? It's knowing our internal states and being aware of the feelings that arise as they happen. It's knowing what our emotional needs are. It's knowing what our physical needs are. And it's acknowledging our feelings and in an authentic and accurate way. The hard part about self-awareness is allowing the sometimes uncomfortable emotions to be what they are. Because when we have self-awareness, we feel what is. So if there's an emotion that we normally push away, it's going to be uncomfortable when it arises. So the more self-aware we become, or the more self-aware we are, the more we see accurately what is going on inside of us. So we're not denying or pushing away feelings that might seem painful. As we courageously look at what is present, the good, the yucky, the neutral, we see with more clarity the reality of our life, and we acknowledge how we feel about our experiences with accuracy and authenticity, which means we don't make everything perfect when it isn't. We don't smile when we're describing our loss. We feel the reality and the magnitude of the messiness of life. Sometimes life is heartbreaking, and we need to feel this heartache in order to be authentic. It doesn't mean we wallow in it, but we sit with it. Feeling it and admitting it to ourselves honors our experience, and it validates the hardship we're going through. It's an act of self-esteem to honor that reality of what is. It's being true to ourselves in a sense, because we're saying, yes, this is my experience. We're not denying it or pushing it away. We're not telling a certain part of us to be quiet, or that certain part of us doesn't matter. Again, this doesn't mean we wallow in these painful moments or this difficult emotion. We don't live in it for a long period of time. We don't let it become our identity. We also don't pretend to be happy, perfect, or great when things are difficult. We find the balance. Both thinking patterns create dissonance and disparity in our psyche. If we're thinking everything is always perfect, or we're thinking this is the worst thing ever, and we wallow in our difficult emotions, both create disparity. And often that disparity leads to depression or anxiety or other psychological hardships that end up, we see the results of those in our work, in our family, in our relationships. So we need to accurately see what is, accurately describe how we feel to create that authentic harmony or balance within our psyche. And this harmony and balance is what creates wholeness. So it can be very curious, it can be very interesting to think about times when we've changed or fixed or distracted away from an emotion that was too uncomfortable. We do it all the time, and it's not about eradicating it, but it's about becoming aware of it. So maybe you drank too much or ate too much or shopped or binge watched TV. There's any number of distractions it could be. But that distraction pushes away the discomfort. Our goal is not perfection, meaning we aren't striving to never, ever use a distraction when we're uncomfortable. Our goal is just to be aware, to be conscious of when these challenging feelings arise and when we are at the crossroads of dealing with our distraction or not. If we choose not to, but we choose it consciously, we chose it consciously. Good for us. That's okay. That's part of being human. So when we see this crossroads, it doesn't mean we'll always choose to experience what is, but it does mean we have awareness of the choice. Seeing the choice is rising above that automatic pilot, which is the first step towards interpreting these kind of memorized patterns or these conditioned ways in which we think. It's this computerized program, if you will, this programming in our mind. So when we become aware of that program, we can change it. We also want to get conscious of the things that cause us discomfort, so we can start to see which situations will probably move us towards distraction. And then again, in a sense, we become more armed. If we know what situations move us toward distractions, sometimes we can tease out some of those situations so we don't deal with them, or we may always have to deal with them, and we learn more tools. So we dive into a situation with more armor. Self-awareness invites inquiry. So we begin to sense very quickly when we are off balance. We might meditate, we might invite the stillness, we might do yoga, we might work out, we might go for a walk. Whatever it is that you feel helps you get centered or present. The more often we live in the present moment, the more we reduce fear and anxiety and stress. Fear and anxiety live in the future and the past. They're based on being here but wanting to be somewhere else. So when we get in the present moment, we're here. And there's nothing else. We have everything we need in this moment. This is why meditation is a very useful tool. The research on meditation is quite profound. All the things that it does to create resilience and help our mind kind of function more succinctly. So the more we're able to live in the present moment, the more we can tap into that sense of creativity. So the more stress and the more thoughts that we have that are intrusive, the less we connect to that sense of creativity. We have to have a sense of ease to feel real creative, to really feel that movement towards creativity, right? We have to feel safe. So one of the ways to do that is to stay in the present moment. So again, practicing that can be very useful. When we recall an emotional event that triggers us, we are reliving anger, sadness, betrayal, or hurt, whatever it is, whatever that upregulated emotion is, repeatedly. So upregulated emotions put our mind and body in a state of stress, which is, again, that's causing us to be disconnected to creativity, disconnected to innovation. And it also hinders us from living in the present moment. When we have an emotional event that has triggered us, that we keep recalling from the past, every time we recall that event, we fire the same neurological chemicals in our mind as we did the first time it happened. You can look up studies on this. It's really quite fascinating. There are many studies that show athletes can improve their performance by visualizing that perfect shot. So you have basketball players visualizing that perfect shot. They let go. Every muscle fires in the perfect way. They let go of that basket that ball right when they need to, and their form is perfect. And then it flies right in through the air and down through the net and swooshes in the net. So they actually improve performance because their brain is firing the exact neurological chemicals that it will fire when they're actually out on the court. So why that matters to us is when we stop those ruminating thoughts, most of us do it with negative thoughts. So most of us ruminate about things that we've felt like we didn't do quite as well. Like you might think about a conversation you had with a coworker or a friend, and you might feel like you spoke harshly or mean or inappropriately or something like that, and you think of it over and over and over again. So when we do that, we're firing those same neurological chemicals as when it really happened. So in a sense, we're kind of beating ourselves up with that repetitive thought. So again, meditation can bring us back, or mindfulness can bring us back to that present moment. So when we have those repetitive thoughts, the idea would be to say, yeah, you know what? That wasn't as effective as I would like. Should I call Sally and apologize? Is that warranted? And you decide. And if it is, call Sally and say, hey, Sally, you know what? I don't feel good about what I said. Can we have a conversation? And clear the air. And if you don't feel like it's appropriate to apologize, then give yourself a break and say, okay, I've moved on. That's done. The past is past. Now we're here. And we move forward. And our fourth idea is find meaning. One final thought as we consider ways to show up as our best self is through finding meaning. As we find meaning, we get out of our own way. We make our why bigger than the challenges we face. Our inspiration pushes us towards perseverance. So when we make our why something that matters to us, when the reason we're getting out there and going to work or doing this thing or working on this project is because we believe in it, when we're in a really difficult time, that will propel us to persevere, even though we might be feeling bleak and out of sorts. So finding meaning is a huge piece of the puzzle. Let's recap the 4 principles. Get out of emergency mode. Set healthy boundaries. Stop saying yes when you need to say no. It's really important. Take care of you. Number 2, watch your self-talk. Become your own best friend, right? Show kindness to yourself. What's the story that we believe to be true about this? What does that news ticker bar in our mind tell us? And why am I believing in this? Whose rule is this? Is this my rule? Am I choosing this? And number 3, foster self-awareness. Ask yourself, what's going on for you? Pay attention to that emotional pulse. What is that trying to tell you? What are your emotions trying to tell you? What is the feeling sensation in your body trying to tell you? And use that awareness to reframe harmful self-talk, to resist impulses, and to reframe reactions. If we feel like a failure, we're going to have a difficult time being productive. But if we reframe that to say, wow, yeah, I'd like to do better next time, and this is how I intend to do that, we empower ourselves and we step into a more creative, go-getter kind of attitude. And number 4, find meaning. Make your why bigger than the challenge. When our why is bigger, we keep digging deeper to find a way to make it happen. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear from you. My email address is jacqueline@jacquelinerinaldi.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much.